how are we doing right now on being able to make sure that everyone has that pursuit of happiness, those opportunities and things like that. And let's grade ourselves really hard on that.
It's the shining city on the hill model, right? You know, it's not as though America's perfect. I criticize it every day for my job, actually. But you know, when the Ukrainian people are looking at like their options, right? Like where do they want to align? Can you hear me all right?
I hear you just fine. Yes.
Fantastic. Likewise here. It is a pleasure to have you on. We're live right now, just to keep you informed. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and I love these kind of conversations. So thank you for letting me in on one.
Of course, the pleasure is mine entirely. So you know, we don't normally have people with very serious jobs and very serious histories on my platform, but it's a delight to be able to ask one of such questions. Could you introduce yourself for the audience?
Certainly. My name is John Ponce, unlike my Zoom thing that has my wife's name up there. I recently retired from the military on the 1st of January after 24 years. In my career, I was originally an infantry officer, and I served in the 82nd Airborne Division. And I was part of the initial Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, also part of the first elections in 2005 in Mosul. After that, I joined the Special Forces and spent the rest of my career, the last 15 years or so, in the U.S. Special Forces. I was assigned with 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I did a couple months in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, with training some Tajiks. And then I also then finished my career, which is one reason why this conversation is such of interest to me. From 2017 until 2021, I was stationed in Mons, Belgium, at the NATO Special Operations Headquarters. And my job was the J7 Director of Exercises, Evaluations, and Assessments. So basically my job there was to work with the NATO nations who were providing forces on behalf of the NATO response force to understand and be tested against the standards and the inoperability checklists that were provided by NATO in order to operate as a NATO force. And then part of that also in 2019, we evaluated Ukraine. Ukraine was the first nation to offer troops to the NATO response force, that force being that if NATO invoked Article 5, this would be the force that would respond. There's been a lot of nations that have, or non-NATO nations that have provided to NATO in the past and continue to do so, but this was the first time that they were actually part of the response force. And so in that, I got a couple chances to go to Kyiv and work with the Ukrainian Special Operations Command and watch them go from, you know, Ukrainian standards to working toward NATO standards and eventually being certified as combat ready to go and fully interoperable with NATO forces, which of course was a great source of pride for them, as it should be, and as it was for my office as well. And so in that, that's kind of where my experience was with the Ukrainians, and then also just serving as a key staff member for a 3-star U.S. general at the NATO Special Operations Command. So there's a not so brief introduction, but I hope that's enough.
Well, you have done many things, so it makes sense. Yeah, you've I have not done anything in my life as much as you've done any of the things that you just talked about. I have so many questions. First of all, and I know I already said this, but to reiterate, thank you very much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Wow. Okay. Whew. So I have a left-leaning political channel, pretty left-leaning, and obviously, for reasons I'm sure you're familiar with, the far left tends to be pretty critical of NATO as an institution, along with the countries that make up NATO and the militaries that are employed by those countries. As I've looked into this, I mean, this conflict kind of brought the world's eyes on NATO in addition to Ukraine and Russia. And as I look into it, I suppose I'm interested a bit in the internal culture of NATO, I guess, to begin with, especially with regards to this recent conflict. When you began bringing Ukraine up to task, or assisting in that process, and helping with the the potential Article 5 task force. I mean, these are momentous possibilities here. I mean, especially if Article 5 got invoked. Was there, I have to wonder what the attitude was, like, on the ground for that. Was there, like, kind of a grim finality to it, like, this could be it? Or was it just operational, like, this is our job, we get it done, sort of? How do you approach that?
I think it was approached with a lot of optimism from NATO's side. Um, there's a great debate that goes on about how much NATO membership needs to happen. Is bigger always better? And when you have an alliance that has stood for 50 some years without really having to go to war, which is its intent, it's a deterrence alliance. I think sometimes people just assume that more is better. And people thought, great, another country, Ukraine, has said they want to come to NATO. That's bigger for us. That's going to be, more of a problem for Russia. And I think maybe we overlooked how much Russia detested that it's not just like, hey, the bigger the better, the more you fight to the party. And I definitely think there was a lot of optimism. And I'm certain that a lot of those people that were very happy about it got worried when this thing started going down, that maybe NATO would overcommit. There's two sides. There's overcommitting and not enough commitment from NATO. And both of those questions are great to have.
Yeah, I'm curious from your perspective. And if you don't want to get too much into the politics of it, that's fine. But to your preference, how large do you think NATO should be? What do you think NATO's end game should be in the modern world?
It's a great question. And I think it's changed and evolved a little bit here in the past few months. And more of history is coming to light about, when the Warsaw Pact broke up and when the wall came down, it just assumed that bigger would be better. But what is the goal of NATO? I mean, the original goal of NATO, Lord Ismay was the first Secretary General, and he said NATO existed for three reasons: to keep the Germans down, the Russians out, and the Americans in. And I find it very interesting to think about that because, well, one, the Germans, we don't need to keep down anymore. They're on our team.
Maybe one day.
Yes. So it kind of, now according to that, which is, several decades old, it's to keep the Russians out and keep the Americans in. But keep them out of what is a great question, because there was only a few members initially of NATO, and it was probably to protect those that couldn't protect themselves. You want an alliance that are all equally aligned, values in terms of democracy and how they treat people and the opportunities they give to those people, strong economic things to support themselves and provide to the defense. And that's a long-winded answer to say, I'm not sure. I think that even when I first got there, I always thought more was better, but they have to be goal-oriented for NATO for membership. Like, what does NATO gain by getting someone in? And you can argue it both ways. I mean, keeping Ukraine out gives you a little bit of a buffer. Strategically speaking, that might be more advantageous. By bringing them in, you just butted up your borders against the person that you said we're trying to keep out. You just brought them closer to the NATO borders. And so I think both of those are very interesting. I would say that, in my opinion, if you're not going to let someone into NATO, or you're saying this is, we've culminated, maybe, it's still saying that if people want certain values, whether it's democracy or freedom, this is something that we should, be willing to stand up for those that want to. I mean, I think that's what NATO did. So we need to be able to offer them something. We did offer some things to Ukraine, whether security assurances versus military assurances is another debate. But I think you got to set those rules ahead of time. You cannot be talking about partnerships, in my opinion, after emergencies happen. I know a lot of people have said, I think Ukraine should be let in right away. Personally, I don't. I don't think that's how the alliance should carry itself. They make their decisions. It's a long process to get 30 nations to agree to something. And so if it hasn't been agreed upon prior to an incursion like that, I don't think it should happen. I don't think it should be forced in or automatically rushed through the process. But you still have to make sure that those that want to be free can be free. What that entails, that's a tough one. I mean, right now it seems to be pretty positive that we're not going to lose all of Ukraine. But I mean, 2 days into it, I think a lot of people thought maybe differently how fast they initially moved. they kind of sputtered out. But if you would ask people the chances of them taking Kiev, I would have said, I don't think it's going to be that hard for them. I probably would have said probably taking a month or less. And here we are, and they're not there. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think the entire world has been shocked by Russia's military unreadiness. I had always assumed that eventually they would lose, that Ukrainian occupation would prove untenable in the long term, something like that, 5-10 years. But I didn't think we'd be seeing. Didn't they recapture like 40 cities or something, or 40 like townships in the past 24 hours or something, like in the Kiev region, like the little outlying neighborhoods? It's ridiculous.
Yes, and several 100,000 people you're talking about that now are no longer under Russian control.
That is legitimately unbelievable. That is, it's difficult to believe. I don't think anyone would have expected that. I didn't see anyone calling that a month and a half ago. So you said NATO. You talked about bringing freedom. Now, I'm wholly on Ukraine's side in this conflict here. So their occupation from Russia, preventing that is freedom as far as I'm concerned. But how do you feel about, and I'm sure you've seen this, because it's a Russian talking point, the equivocation with NATO, the idea that, Russia is an occupier and NATO is an occupier. And it's really just two equal and opposite forces fighting to control territory for realpolitik reasons, just purely mathematical, utilitarian occupation of territory.
Can you state the question one more time, please?
Oh, sure, yeah. In essence, what distinguishes in your mind what NATO does and what Russia does in terms of their respective occupations, and how do you feel about the people who equate the two? Because I see a lot of that online. It's like central to Russian propaganda.
Okay. Well, of course, I guess my initial response would be is NATO is a alliance with 30 members. Russia is a country with membership of 1. And even their allies that they do have might be giving them monetary support, but you're not even seeing, they don't have a military alliance. They're conducting a military operation. They don't have a military alliance. So I think they would be hard sell to say that they're on the same par of the ability, the nature of an alliance that NATO has. And you asked to come into NATO. Russia had their alliance, the Warsaw Pact, and when given the opportunity to leave, they all promptly left.
That's true. I guess I have to wonder, because it seems like Russia's attitude towards its neighbors is really, really different than a lot of other countries in the region. That Russia is uniquely willing to invade or to bully, just very direct. Like almost like a century-old style. And with that being said, if Ukraine wins, if Ukraine gets let into NATO or not, like, how do you reconcile a world where Russia and NATO are at each other's doorsteps? I mean, they are in the Balkans anyway, right? It seems like this is just an eternal powder keg, and give or take this victory in Ukraine, it seems like an almost unsolvable problem, really, diplomatically at least. Oh, Baltic region, not Balkan. Sorry.
Right. I probably would say it is. I don't have an answer for it, that's for sure. And I'm sure a lot of analysts are trying to figure out, like, what do we want in 10 years between the relationship between Russia and NATO and non-NATO members? I think people just want to be able to choose their own alliances, to choose who they do business with. But at the same time, the kind of tying in economies or resources and sharing, I think, is a good step toward, hey, if we become reliant on one another, let's not go to war with each other. So I don't think we should be, doing the Heisman, to Russia and saying, like, because you've been bad according to our standards, we're going to cut you all out of these things. I think they still have a real role to play in the economy and the trade inside Europe and Asia, all the way across. So I would be, hard pressed to say that the post-Ukraine conflict is going to needs to be a world where we heavily punish Russia. I mean, okay. What is our end game? Do we want sovereignty back? Are we willing to give up some of these Russian separatist areas? And again, I think people have to think about, if you try to expect Russia to go back out of there with absolutely nothing, that's going to be a tough sell for their leader. You give him something, he has come in, he has taken it. We're trying to find an amicable resolution. Resolutions aren't always back to the status quo. So maybe these regions that go to them that have Russian separatists anyway, where fighting was taking place, yes, we perhaps are playing into some propaganda. Maybe it gets to go back and say, look, we are the merciful country that only took the Russian separatists and we let them have the rest of their country. And, we didn't want to, NATO didn't want to get in a fight, so we decided to let it off. I mean, there's going to be propaganda on both sides, no matter how it ends. But is it the most amicable solution? Is it going to, one, stop the bloodshed, which is definitely a goal that's a daily thing that people are worried about, but it can't be the only goal. Strategically speaking, you have to think much farther. And I've heard many debates of, on one hand, of course, we don't want any bloodshed. Of course not. That's not what we're after. We also don't want Russia to be able to come in and bully their way through a sovereign country. But where do those two things meet? How much are you willing to let go? If there's a lot of bloodshed that takes place, but a little bit more means that Russia has to go back with its tail between its legs, and the whole world now knows that they're unable to take a large city like Kyiv, which isn't the largest city or the hardest city to take. That might be a message to the whole world about what you can do in terms of bullying the next 10, 15, 20 years. And that's a tough question for policymakers to come to terms with. Again, on one side, you want to stop all the bloodshed right now, but I don't know. Is there a point that we are willing, in terms of our national security and our long-term efforts, to say this needs to go on for a little bit so that Russia can have its place on the world stage to show that it's inept to do anything further?
I agree with that. My hope was, and I guess we're seeing that play out right now, which is delightful, is that who would be the Russian people, the Russian oligarchs, just everyone who has any say whatsoever, can learn, like, this is just not an effective way of building back an empire. If they want to pursue aggressive trade relations or whatever, I mean, fine, anything but this. I have to wonder, do you think that, given how hyped up he is right now, Zelenskyy would be willing to make a concession like that, like the Donbass region, the territories controlled by separatists beforehand? Because right now, I mean, asking, America to enforce a no-fly zone, asking for more weapons so they can use it to retake territory. He's done a good job with the effort so far, don't get me wrong, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's like, on that war fervor, like he wants to reclaim every square inch of Ukrainian territory. He never recognized, after all, Crimea's annexation, so maybe maybe he would try to go for that too.
I don't doubt his desire for that. I think when you look at his addressing of Congress, asking for a no-fly zone and not being provided that, those are kind of the overt messages of saying what we're willing to provide and how we kind of want this thing to play out, which is a resolution, a quick resolution, and we're not going to be a part of it militarily. As of right now. And there'd be a lot that would have to change before I think we would get involved militarily. Countries go to war. It hasn't been a long time in Europe, but it does happen. And as long as there's not massive violations of anything in terms of chemical wars or nuclear wars, like, you're probably not going to see any nation go in, to include the U.S. And I do agree with it. I like the General Eisenhower had a mentor named Fox Connor, and he advised both Eisenhower and Marshall. And there's a quote that he always said, that never go to war unless you have to, never go to war alone, and never go to war for long. And I think that's being adhered to here. And maybe we haven't done that always in the past 20 years, right? Maybe we violated that a little bit.
A little bit.
And maybe we're looking at that and learning from it. And that would be a hope as well. And trying to force certain policies or things on that. I don't know if we're good at that. I think the last 20 years kind of maybe said, maybe this isn't our coup de grace. This is not exactly what we're after. But standing behind someone and sticking to what we previously agreed to, again, like those security assurances. But after the emergency happens, I don't think we need to go back and relook. Did we have the right policy in place? We knew this was a threat. We knew this was possible, and we stuck with those kind of assurances to Ukraine for a reason. And I think Zelenskyy has done a wonderful job for sure. I think the Western world is seeing a leader in front of his people, and I think he's fully committed. But I think even a leader has to know that there are concessions that sometimes have to be made. We've had to do it. Other people have had to do it. What do you want? Is really your end goal to make sure that the borders of Ukraine never change? That's going to have long-term problems. But if your goal is to allow those Ukrainians that want to be Ukrainian and live freely, well, then can you accomplish that by giving up some of those territories? And if the answer is yes, then I guess my thought is, I think that's what he should do.
Gotcha. I think with regards to involvement in this conflict, I mean, there is of course something that distinguishes Russia from, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, so on. And that's the world's largest nuclear stockpile. I have to wonder because, of course, you being on the ground, you know way more than like the average person fear-mongering while scrolling through Twitter. The possibility of nuclear involvement, is this something which has been taken seriously by operational command in NATO at all, more so than normal, or has this just been seen as more like Russian chest puffing?
Yeah, I'm definitely yes, I have been in NATO, but the people that talk about nuclear war were above my pay grade, as we say. These are some very smart people advising Zach here and advising Jens Stoltenberg. I think my opinion only is that it's chest puffing. He knows that that's not going to get him anywhere. That is when the world would see, in my opinion, a need to act, because I think the avoidance of nuclear war on a country like that I don't think we would tolerate it. Boy, where would that go? How would that end? That's dangerous, and he knows that, and so he can play that card up to the toe the line with it, because you do have to make some responses. I mean, they activated some nuclear portions of their military, and we have to put some people on alert. It's just how it is, and it's really scary. It is, and it's nothing to be laughed about or taken lightly. But I'd like to think that if Putin has miscalculated his goal, his military capability, it's due mostly to the fact that he's probably not getting the advice and the candid feedback he needs, as opposed to being completely irrational.
Yeah, it seems likely that he's surrounded himself with yes men. I know, of course, that he's like fired people from his cabinet in the recent past, and apparently he's very angry at how things have gone. So, I guess
those are probably the no men that he got rid of.
Oh yeah, sorry, my bad. He's making it even more homogenous. Then, I guess that's the irrationality of autocrats. I suppose it's you multiply their irrationality times whatever feedback they're selecting from the cabinet they handpick to agree with them. Actually, to that then, with regards to the yes men, no men, and their general failure in Ukraine, their military capabilities. I mean, it's been astonishing. It feels like every single day we get like some incredible new development in their incompetence in the Ukrainian front. You said that you also didn't expect it to go down this way. Did anybody? I mean, with the intel you had, like, how did this happen?
Yeah, I think. Well, when you start looking back at how many times Russia has done their exercises on the border, where it ended with no war, we forget about how that trains people's mentality to not truly be ready, perhaps not truly be prepared. And there's been a lot of discussion of like a lot of these conscripts that they had no idea. They had no idea when they left their house to go on this exercise that they were going to go to war. And they acted like that. They maybe got rid of some of their supplies or their rations, thinking that they were going home soon. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, go this way. And I was like, oh, we don't really have the gas for that.
I heard that they were selling gas out of their vehicles, because like just some like petty officer would just like siphon off gas and just sell it off for a little extra money, which is, I'm pretty sure, I mean, in the United States, like you could never get away with that in like any decent military, right? That's like an exceptional level of graft.
Yeah. And I bet you it's just been over the many, many years of doing these exercises and coming back and doing these exercises. Yeah, they're like, hey, let's make a little bit, and things like that typically grow. And there's been even some discussion saying that when they created their humanitarian corridor for people to come to Russia, which we might shake our head at, was more of an avenue of them to resupply their troops with the kind of stuff they needed, because that would allow them to travel down this humanitarian corridor. And if that is true, inside the intel worlds, they're passing that around to say, look, these people were completely caught off guard. So, maybe the troops knew that they weren't quite combat ready, and some of the low-level leaders, but it just wasn't making it to Moscow. And again, like how you try to keep a tab on your combat readiness if you haven't gone to combat is difficult for any nation. And I think it just got away from them, and they just figured that they had enough might, and maybe guessed that NATO would not come in. I assume they thought that, and I think it was a good planning assumption on their part. NATO would not come in militarily, and they felt they just had the time and the swiftness to get Kiev before the nation could rally. Countries could rally around providing supplies and the sanctions to take effect. But when it stalled, I think they ran into a real big problem.
So the truth that I've heard, or like I guess the narrative that I've heard, is that Russia has this colossal military, and the problem is, even though they've only deployed a fraction of it, is that they can't afford to, and also that most of the vehicles that they had sort of like puffing up their national numbers they're just sitting in a depot somewhere. Like their tracks don't function, they're inoperable, they haven't been maintained in decades, they're like post-Soviet. With regards to that, like, do you think do you think that's true? Like, it's just they're out, they don't have the money to maintain this war, and we're basically just seeing a tenth of their military because that's all they could ever afford to field at a time?
I think we're seeing the true Russian military now. To say that it's a tenth, I don't think so. I think they just they weren't as big as maybe we all thought they were. It's a large country. And they probably have people that have been trained up or kind of in their country how they view everyone's a soldier if it has to be, but those that have actually received really good training, like it hasn't happened. And just going on an exercise to go to a border and drive your tanks around and then you sell off your gas at the end, that's not going to make you ready. I think they came to war with the army that they knew they had, and I just think they thought that it was going to be swift and they were going to be able to get some concessions quickly. But that convoy stalling, I think, was probably kept Putin up at night. He didn't see that coming, and he might have known a little bit about his capabilities, but like that, I think, caught a lot of people off guard, and that allowed the Ukrainians to turn the tide a little bit. It's not hard to attack a sitting convoy. While they have good tactics inside Ukraine, it doesn't take much when you're dealing with something like that, and that allowed them to gain some momentum, really gain some world stage of like, we can do this. And I think that's when we started putting more into it, money, supplies, to say, hey, if you can beat them on your own, this is going to be this is going to be the greatest event for our national security, for Russia to be beaten by Ukrainians alone. A quick end would be for NATO or America to be in there. But again, the long 15, 20-year term or long-term thinking is if they know they can't get past Ukraine, which, I'm not saying Ukraine's just should have been a small, pothole along the way to Poland. But I really thought they were going to at least be on the outskirts of Kiev, if not take it. That's what I would have said back in January, and I would have been wrong. So, take it for what it's worth for the rest of the stuff I say. But that's just kind of how I see it for Putin. I think when that happened and he had, you lost the momentum. You lost the whatever he had going into that war, and all of a sudden that's when it turned.
Yeah, it's a remarkable departure, I guess, from what I'd expected, because I keep up with a lot of RT propaganda, like what they've been putting out, and this has been happening for decades, really, but I've heard all this messaging since the war began. It's been like, well, Russia's only sending in their conscripts first. The real army is coming second. Of course, that's stupid. I don't think that's a real, let's let 10,000 guys die, then we send in the real. I don't think that's real. Not an officer though, so couldn't say.
No, I would agree with you, and think if you do this for the first time, you're going to invade a country for a long, long time. So that you're going to send the C squad. No, that if you're going to send people in, you're sending your A squad, because then you make people think the people I have in reserve are even better. No, I think they put their best foot forward, and that we saw how good it was. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, no, not at all. Yeah, the idea of like, I know how we'll secure this quick and easy victory on the road to Kiev. We'll suicide like all these VDV paratroopers, and lose tanks to Ukrainian farmers, and only then will we show them. Right? Yeah, it seems inadvisable. So you talked about like how Ukraine wouldn't just be a road bump on the way to Poland, though of course if they can't march their way through Ukraine, the idea of them marching through Poland is ludicrous. But your job was literally, I mean, you're getting, in part, like getting Ukraine on board, and I have to wonder, what does that entail? Like, that sounds, in retrospect, like this must be very satisfying for you, because now you're seeing essentially Ukraine like holding off the second largest military on earth. What did that involve?
And I will say, and I know that a lot of them from that battalion are engaged, and I wish them the best, and I love that they're standing so strong. But when we walked out of there, I had to say that my report wasn't. We didn't give them an A+. That's for sure. They had their struggles. They had their economic struggles. They had a big problem with the general staff was, in my opinion, listening to people talk from the Ukrainian military, you had senior levels that were of the old Soviet mentality, and you had a younger generation that was much more adaptive and flexible, because they were trying to do certain things, and this guy had to talk to that guy, had to talk to that guy, had to talk to that guy. It's this little chain of bureaucracy that was exactly. I mean, they were even line and block chart. Their task org was still from their Soviet days. They hadn't even changed it yet because these senior leaders were like that. I mean, small things, like even in all their different sections and units, they always had a sniper. It was just one of the things that the Russians always had. And so they kept it there. And it's kind of like, why do you guys like, well,
Is that
that's not film, but
is that obsolete?
mentality.
Sorry to interrupt. Is that like an
Yeah,
obsolete doctrine?
it absolutely is. But the seniors leaders were hanging on to it.
Hmm.
And I think it was just, that's what they knew. And then at the lower levels, what we were seeing is they were kind of, again, this younger generation, much more flexible, much more adaptive, grew up in a different Ukraine. And they just kind of blew it off. Like, yeah, we don't worry about that. That's the old mentality. It'll be gone in a few years, when our generals are no longer serving. But again, it wasn't an A+ coming out of there, but they definitely had the drive. But they had a lot of problems in terms of like coming into NATO or putting forces out, which had a lot of eyes on. The bureaucracy process was stifling. But on the ground, when you're chasing tanks, there's no generals there to tell you how to do it. And these guys are on the ground making decisions, learning from their actions, getting smarter for what the Russians are doing. And as time goes on, they're just getting stronger.
That is really interesting. When I hear like Soviet mentality, I mean, I was born after the Soviet Union fell. So to me, when I think of that, I think of like it conjures in my mind the same image of like World War II, like Panzerfausts and like, Sherman tanks rolling over hills in France. It's very antiquated, but well, no, a lot of those guys legitimately would have been in the Soviet Union. When So you talk about the bureaucracy being stifling there. I think I see that younger energy. I think in a way Zelenskyy represents that, given his use of social media. He's obviously a really young guy. I guess he would embody that in my mind, I think. That the older brass, the bureaucracy, were they cooperative with NATO, or was there this lingering antagonism?
They were cooperative, but I didn't interact with the senior level leaders much. I mean, I had a sit down with the commander of the Ukrainian Special Forces as an intro.
Jesus.
And he was, of course, extremely thankful for everything we were doing. He did stop by frequently to say thanks. And so I think he genuinely appreciated it. But I just think that he didn't come and do a lot of the exercises or the decision process. Again, you want to stay away from the lower level commander. You want to give him some space. But I also think, my personal opinion, he wasn't comfortable with it. It was a doctrine he never learned. It was tactics that he never learned. There was a lot of fast-moving things that were on the battlefield, whether it's communications, demolition, or just weapons and tactics, that it wasn't what he grew up with. And now his job was to help the political appetite in Ukraine get on board with a military joining this alliance. And it's difficult because a lot of times when you wear a uniform like I did, you think of NATO as a military alliance, but it's a political body. And it's very apparent it is. And like when we would do our big exercises where we certify this response force, the first person to speak was the POLAD, the political advisor. That's who got the first hop in the microphone because it was a political organization. And the 4-star general, he got to go second. And it wasn't an attempt to try to jockey for position. It's just how this body and this organization works. They are a political entity. They have a military means for when negotiations fail or an Article 5 is invoked. But until then, they're just a readiness thing. They're just there for deterrence. Everything else is supposed to be on the political, diplomats talking to one another. And I think, trying to come back to the question, like the senior levels of the Ukraine military, they just didn't, that wasn't ground that they were comfortable with. So they wanted to just make sure that their people were supported and that, they stayed in line with the proper party line, that we're happy, we want to join NATO, we are excited. But, I don't know if on the senior level it was all there. They kind of probably saw it as a distraction.
Gotcha. That is really interesting to me. It would make sense, of course. Obviously a military alliance is going to be met with mutual political obligations because you would never want a defensive alliance with like an irrational country. You'd want to make sure they're being sort of constrained in the way that most modern democracies are in terms of their foreign engagement. With regards to, so you were talking about like operational doctrines and their being obsolete with some of these Soviet-style like older officers, the top brass. What we're seeing right now in Ukraine, what's your insight into the Russians getting bogged down? Because we see obviously like there's some obvious stuff like fuel running out. I know that Ukraine is really marshy, so you have to stick to roads. I know there's low morale on the conscript side, but I'm willing to bet, we see these victories from afar, but I imagine that what's happening right now on the part of Ukraine's special defense is a product of like an incredibly deliberate strategy that's panning out relatively well. And I guess I want to know, as somebody who would have had a hand, at least in part, in imbuing that, what's going on outside of Russian incompetence?
I think what you said that is the biggest part is morale. I mean, why does someone join the military? You probably have a sense of pride in your country. You're willing to defend it. I don't know if the reasons that myself and many others that I know joined the American military were the same reasons that the Russian conscripts are in their position. So I think when you start from a different base of motivation and have a different why, you're going to have a different how. And they don't have any probably real desire to take all of that. Maybe they want those Russian separatists to be part of their country if they've learned about it or read about it. Maybe they think, yes, these people want to be with us. There are some people that should be able to come here. And they also got to come with their land. I don't know. They can't just leave and go to Russia. But I don't think the morale is there. It's kind of like, when you've watched any kind of sporting event where the team is completely number one in the country and the underdog, they come out and they're down 20 points. But then all of a sudden, they start hitting the 3-pointers. And like you can see it on the look on their faces. The bench is not getting out of their seats. The players are hanging their heads. They're just kind of like feeling defeated. And they probably were told very early on that they were going to just march through this place and whatever. They're going to be home. They're going to be home by April, or whatever they were told. And probably what they were told is not panning out. And the more you tell your people, you tell your soldiers something, and you can't deliver, your morale is going to go way down. And the Ukrainians are just they're driving up, and they're seeing some of these things, and they're able to talk to people when a city goes back into Ukrainian control. They know it, and that gets them fired up.
It seems like so often when military affairs get discussed, at least in my experience, obviously I have no military experience, but just like generally, people talk about it in terms of measurable empirics, national budgets, like what weapons people have, how many of those weapons people have, stuff like that. But it seems like so often conflicts are determined in large part by like what you've said, morale, you know? In Afghanistan, for example, the Taliban pretty much instantly overwhelmed the the defense forces there, despite their superior numbers and military equipment. In Ukraine, of course, they're fighting a losing battle and somehow pulling out on top. Even in Vietnam, right? Vietnam's national will to resist us contributed to them being able to fight despite their massive casualties. But it's really hard to put a number on that.
Yeah.
I don't even know how you would. It seems like as time goes on, we try to overcome this with more advanced weaponry, but at the end of the day, like, countries are just very naturally resistant to being invaded. Like, the lines in the sand have been more or less drawn. I would hope that would mean there would be less warfare in the future, because it seems like it's getting harder and harder. Anti-tank weaponry is getting cheaper, tanks are getting more expensive. It just seems like the math is winning out in favor of the occupied, in favor of the occupier.
In favor of the occupier?
Sorry, in favor of the occupied instead of the occupier. My bad. I talked for too long. My sentence drew on.
No, good, because that I would agree with that very much. And again, it's kind of what does someone have to win or lose? The Ukrainian people, they have so much to lose. And I was going to say, I thought earlier, for your audience, if they are interested in Ukraine, and this obviously they're here, they're listening. They wouldn't have stayed out with me that long if it wasn't something that they cared about. If they haven't seen the documentary Winter on Fire, it's a really good one. It's only an hour and a half, totally worth your 90 minutes. And it talks about, when Yanukovych was pulling out of the EU deal with Putin at the same time. And the resulting effect was the government kind of shut down, and the people were upset, and they went to the streets, and they went to Maidan Square, and they surrounded it, and it was like Les Miserables. I mean, they occupied that area, and they said, we want to have this happen. And eventually they were able to get Yanukovych to fly out on a late night helicopter and go into Russia. They had a strong why. They had a strong will. They had a lot to lose. And when you have a lot to lose, you're willing to put a lot on the line. What does the conscript have to lose? In fact, the most he has to gain is also a quick resolution. So how hard is he fighting? I don't know.
And just today, I think Ukraine offered to essentially buy out defectors from Russia. Like, if they bring a tank with them to give to they'll be like, here's $500,000 or something, which is incredibly funny. It's a very funny conflict in a lot of ways. Yeah, they said like $1 million for a warship, which if they get even a single warship from that would be ridiculous. But speaking about occupiers, many people have criticized NATO for being overly U.S. driven, despite it being a mostly European theater. Obviously during its creation, and since then it's mostly been like a European affair, but America is of course the biggest, strongest country in NATO. Do you think there is an undue or disproportionate influence on the part of America, or do you think this is mostly made up?
Undue influence. I guess you'd have to really define who gets to have their due. And in a lot of cases, especially in alliance, if you write the check, you get to pick the menu. And again, if NATO was founded on the idea of like keeping America in, they didn't say keep America and then country B and C and D. The idea was that our ability to project such power from across the way, while also being quite protected due to our geography, we were a vital member in European security. And in the end, in my opinion, European security is part of our national security. Now, you can argue it. I don't say you can't. You can be like, hey, how much is this, affecting the security of the average person? Myself now as, a retired military guy, it's not. But, as a world leader, I think you have world responsibilities. I really do. And that's one reason why I enjoyed serving. And that's one reason why I enjoyed, sometimes even if it was just our best efforts or our best intentions, what we've tried to do in our history. And no, we're not going to get it right. And no, we didn't get it right all the time. But if you think that you believe strongly in your values and that it should be something that people should have if they want it, then you should be able to exert it a little bit. And if you want to exert it, then you pay the price. And if it's a dollar amount to make some decisions or to have some key leader positions, that's what you do. And I think it's been quite clear. They kind of outline it. We've got a whole certain charts and memorandums and policies about who gets what position based on what you pay. So it's as transparent as you can be. We pay the money, we get to have the decision making. Should we be making that many decisions for Europe? I think you could argue very well, no, we shouldn't. And how do we walk ourselves out of that? I don't know. Are we seeing that a little bit now? We're seeing some other nations providing some resources and some equipment, allowing staging for a lot of things outside near the border. So I don't think it's clear if it's just a U.S. response here. I think NATO is doing something. You can argue whether it's enough or not. That's good to have. That kind of tension in that main subject, are we doing enough, is what's going to be able to make the alliance better. And listening to one another. And America just needs to have a role. And we don't create things after it. So we were the decision makers on a lot of things because we wrote the checks ahead of time. And I think that's just got to keep going as it is for now. In the future, if we want to, give up some positions, I would be in favor of that. I would like to see. But
do you feel positively then about Germany increasing their defense spending? It seems like they might be positioning themselves to be an arbiter of, regional defense. Maybe that could take some of the burden off America in terms of making that region be, or at least feel safe.
Absolutely. I would be in favor of that. I mean, there's many means that are non-military to help somebody else stand up, and we can provide direct support to Germany and in many ways. But if we could work ourselves out of not the job, but of the perception, which is a reality, that we're driving a lot of the decisions, I think that strengthens the alliance. I think the more that we can get it in taking on European security, I think that's great. I don't want to be out of it or anything like that. I want to be a part of it. I want to say that, if someone comes into your territory, that we stand behind you, as long as they're in line with our values. And, losing a country like that is, in my opinion, a downturn for our national security. Not directly. It's hard. I understand it's hard to make that line, and I don't disagree with someone who really questions it. I think it's a good question. But when people get to live freely, we all prosper, and that's what our security is for.
I fully agree. You said earlier that you felt one of the more optimistic directions things could go with Russia is a kind of trade interdependence, Maybe they don't become a liberal democracy, okay, but if they're trading robustly with us and us with them, they're at least disincentivized from engaging in aggression against us. I feel positively about that. In a lot of conflicts around the world, I guess I'd hope that'd be like a strong deterrent against military aggression. And I was hoping, given this is the way things seem to be going at the moment, at least in some parts of the world, I feel like, and I was wondering how you felt about this, we could probably do to massively cut, and by us I mean America, our military budget. This isn't a national defense thing in a direct sense. Obviously, we're not going to be attacked directly. That's not really feasible, I don't think. Not with our nuclear stockpile, our location, whatever. But it seems as though America occupies the position of like world police in a lot of people's minds. And as a product of that, 1.3 billion people in Europe get to enjoy national budgets undeterred by regional investment in defense spending because we pick up the bill on a lot of that. And I think, spending shared in that respect might incentivize everyone to reevaluate how much money we spend on national defense. A lot of it does seem a little bit excessive, especially from us. I mean, no one's going to attack England. No one's going to attack France. They could at least be tuned down, I think.
I will definitely say, and it's my opinion only, obviously, I agree with you. I'm a big Eisenhower fan, and if people have not listened to his farewell address about the military-industrial complex, please take some time and do that. That's another wonderful thing on this very topic you're talking about. What an interesting thing, and I'm going to say it, and I hope I can back it up, but I was looking at this, and if I get it wrong, I apologize. But from 2014 to 2021, every nation in NATO has increased their common spending as a percentage of their GDP, except America. We are the only one who has gone down. And I have that chart, if I'm saying it correctly, that it's definitely, we're the only country from 2014 to 2021 that has decreased as a percentage of their GDP. So we're going in the right direction, but we're spending so much early on that there was a lot happening. So I think we're trending in it, but it may be in a turtles fashion. We are going this race very slowly. But I think that is something we need to do, and it needs to be goal oriented. We're going to go down to this much spending because we feel that you guys, wherever we're talking about, guys and gals, these countries can hit these benchmarks, and it has to be deliberate like that.
I would hope so, especially since my hope would be, they rely on us, the countries of NATO, and if we all were to meet those expectations, the hope would be we could have collectively decide maybe they're a bit excessive. I obviously recognize the need for a strong national defense. What we're seeing in Ukraine right now makes me think, like, there are few militaries that can match Russia's, even after what we've seen of them in the past, month and a half. Like, they're still a relatively strong military. And Ukraine was able to hold them off with, of course, significant, arms provided by NATO forces. When I look at that, I think, like, with things being so tilted in favor of the occupied, it really seems like for countries that are in NATO, Poland, France, us, whatever else, like, nukes pretty much solve the question. No invasion against us could ever bear fruit. It would be impossible. Our military couldn't invade our country. We're you know what I mean? Like, if we could clone the US, and like, it's so stacked. And in a way that's really great, because it's like, this decreases the likelihood of, like, world conflict so much, because nobody can really win. And on the other hand, it makes me really worried, because it makes me feel like the amount we spend on our military, the world broadly, isn't proportional to the imagined need for it. It's like two unrelated factors, just some secondary expenditure that just goes up no matter what.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm a former military guy myself, but I mean, again, the goal should not just always be bigger and better and spend more, is what the result of that mentality is. I would love to see all that money to go towards some of the things that we have going on in our country. We want the freedom so that we can make these decisions, and some of the things need money to help, those that are less fortunate than people like myself that live inside my own country. I do want to take care of them. I do think we have an obligation, and it's a tough balance. Don't get me wrong. I'm not the guy for it. I just know that when I see just how much superiority we have, while we have another awesome alliance ready to come to our defense if we were to be invaded or to really be threatened. And I have no doubt that we really were, our sovereignty was threatened. I have no doubt that NATO would be there. Yep, it might take them a little while. Maybe they're not so quick. Maybe the response force might not be so responsive. I understand that. Those critiques are welcomed, and I understand the thought process behind it. I do. It's a tough thing to make decisions amongst many countries. But with that in your corner, when you have that strong of an alliance in your corner, who do we fear? Who are we worried about? And who do we need the next biggest, best generation of aircraft and ships and things like that? I think it's a wonderful thing to have. And I think the American people, if they feel that way, should look into that, get smart on that, and talk to their representatives on it, because, we should have, I say goal-oriented stuff for them coming down. We should also have goal-oriented stuff for us. If we need to spend that much more money, what goal are we yet to achieve? I mean, the superiority we have, I think, is there a limit? Is there a limit? So we can start saying, all right, we're going to start decreasing. We're starting, making life in America better, because, dang it, this is what people in World War II fought for, to make sure that this doesn't come into our area. And that's what we try to wage a lot of other wars for, or at least the mentality was, because that is the mentality that should prevail. And if we have the opportunity now to do it, to put some more money back inside our borders, I don't think we're short on social issues and needs that could be helped by decreasing. And I'm not saying I'm anti-military. Like I said, for over 24 years. I know how that must sound. I can only imagine how I might sound to some people and say, well, that's not very supportive. But you want to work your way out of having to have such superiority. You want to work your way out of the need to have an aircraft carrier that can, on itself, destroy like half the countries in the world, because it's just that powerful. We don't need it. What do we need? Let's get that, and but it's tough, because then if something can happen 30 years down the line, then I'm completely wrong, because we didn't keep up on the technology and the research and development.
No, I think you're right. If anything, I think this indicates it, right? Like right now, in terms of our military investment, I feel like we're getting ready for an alien invasion. I mean, like what else is going to, like at the moment at least, I know that I know China's got a strong military and all, but and they're probably not as puffed up as Russia is, but still, like compared to us, compared to NATO, and I think if anything, the conflict has shown us it seems like the real victory here for the West against Russia has been an economic and political one, not a military one. Obviously, Ukraine has benefited from the supplies they've been given, but it's not like they have the full fleet of our vastly superior, like what, javelins are from like the 1990s, aren't they, or earlier? Like they're not cutting edge. They're just good. What it's really been is like the rest of the world coming together politically, like the UN resolutions, like having the money to send excess equipment over. And in that respect, I feel like the best national defense we can get for America at this point is supporting our ailing infrastructure, making sure that we have a strong quality of life, making sure that our economy and our investment in our economy is top notch, because that seems like the best way to shield ourselves from real military threats, to make it so that any attack against the US would collapse the world economy anyway. It seems like a pretty good, that's like an economic mutually assured destruction, like how countries around the world have trillions of US debt held in US dollars, like all over. Like who would want our dollar to collapse? China doesn't, that's for sure. Like their economy would collapse right after. Like it'd be horrible for them. Sorry, I'm rambling, but
No,
I
love it. It's
dream
good.
of a better world. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, on that subject, sometimes what people will say in terms of spreading democracy, it's kind of how we feel like we're just people being able to make their choices. You can do that through military means. You can spread it through military means. You can spread it through non-military means. You can defend it where it exists with military means. You can, defend it where it exists with non-military means. But there's a fifth one that sometimes isn't always mentioned in that conversation. And perhaps the best way to spread democracy is to have a really good one yourself and to be a darn good model of one. And so we should perhaps pull out the grade sheet and think, how are we doing right now on being able to make sure that everyone has that pursuit of happiness, those opportunities and things like that. And let's grade ourselves really hard on that. So, and I think there can be a lot that can be gained for. And like if you have an alliance, and you have such a strong European alliance, which we have, what for? So hopefully draw back. And like I said, I'll find you the chart and I'll send it to you to make sure I'm correct. You can fact check me.
Absolutely, please.
Because I think that's very important, because if I've said something wrong, then I really want to make sure hopefully you come back to your audience and let them know if I'm wrong on that. But I want to show it to you. And we're like the only country that's gone down. So again, in a thin slice of it, it's not happening fast enough. But if that's the way the trajectory is going, then all right, let's do it.
It's the shining city on the hill model, right? It's not as though America's perfect. I criticize it every day for my job, actually. But when the Ukrainian people are looking at like their options, right? Like where do they want to align? We saw this with the Euromaidan, right? Like when Yanukovych, just after promising to be with the EU, just decided to have an exclusionary trade deal with Russia. They can take a look at what's going on in Russia. They can take a look at what's going on in the EU, and I think that the choice there is pretty straightforward, and that's only a decision they can make easily because we've invested more in our people, not like the entire Russian economy got carved up by oligarchs. Not to say we don't have some of that ourselves, but they're in a league of their own. they outdo us. We envy them in terms of their oligarchy. Anyway, I just think we paint a better model, and I don't know. I feel like that's a good kind of patriotism. It feels like you said, like Eisenhower, like a more respectable form of patriotism, I think, than a lot of the chest beating a lot of people do, like Congress buying more tanks for the military when the military was asking, like don't we have enough tanks at the moment? I remember that from a couple years ago. Just excessive stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I think in order to think critically, sometimes you have to criticize, and that's okay. If you do it with the intent of let's bring this out from under the table and put it on the table and have a frank discussion about it, I think that's exactly what needs to happen. And people should be able to defend it, even if you're being critical of it. And then we listen to their side, and then we see if we can't understand what they feel in terms of, hey, we're doing what we need to, or we're at least going in the right direction. And it might not be as fast as you want, but trying to understand the vision of, is difficult, especially in a country where that your head leader is only going to be in for at most 8 years, which is a great thing. But it also can be difficult when you're trying to do a 30-year vision when you have sometimes different mentalities sitting in the office. And that back and forth, again, I think is a happy tension. I think it can be a happy tension. And I think many times in our history it has. I think if we stick to that and stick to being critical thinkers and being willing to criticize if we have to, but then to also do it with the effect of, or the intent of making things better for what our values are in this country, I'm all for it. So keep doing what you're
100%.
doing.
I didn't ask you beforehand how much time you had, but if you still have time to talk, I have some more questions. I don't know how busy your day is.
I have some more time. Sure, let's do a few more.
Sweet. Okay. So with regards to I think it's called the Budapest Accords. I'm forgetting right now. My head is blanking. Where Ukraine agreed to give up the nuclear weapons station there after the Soviet Union fell. So there's been some discussion. Now, Ukraine at the moment seems like they're indicating that they don't want to join NATO after this is all settled. At least that could just be like a peace talk deal. I don't really know how that'll go. Either way, they've proven invading them isn't going to work out well for Russia. So, but how do you feel about them pursuing potential nuclear rearmament if they stay out of NATO after this is all done?
Well, the question would be why? If they are able to stand against an enemy like that without it, and we are willing to support, I don't think that we should support that kind of endeavor. I don't think that's going to solve problems in our geopolitical sphere. I think it'll only exacerbate it by making people more skeptical of what you will do with it. That's the big question, right? Do you want nuclear arms? And if so, are you willing to use them? Eisenhower, again, he's one of my favorite individuals ever.
Mm-hmm.
He was reportedly known for saying that someone gave us some advice and said, think long and hard about whether you will or will not use nuclear weapons, and then tell nobody. And apparently that's kind of how his approach to it. It's that dangerous of a topic that you can't give any sway one way or the other. And who knows what General Eisenhower came to a conclusion on those things. As far as I know, he never told anyone his thoughts. But that's how it tells you how dangerous those things are. And so to try to do that requires a lot of backing and support and protection. And I think it would just be better spent saying that, we're going to provide things to you to make sure that you have what you need to fight off the enemy. And clearly they are able to do a lot of that. Not fully, they haven't been able to repel them, but if they're not doing it with, the very best of the equipment that is out there, but trying to jump over that step rather than to try to up their military, up their equipment, up their doctrine, trying to jump all the way to nuclear, I think, I don't see where that helps the tension on Russia. You have to, sometimes it's hard, but intel analysts that are really good, this is what they do. They sit in a room, they're both in the same country, they're both in the same alliance, and we call it red hatting in the military. You put on the hat of the enemy. On maps, the enemy's always a red icon versus a friendly is a blue. So you call it red hatting. Like if I got my red hat on, what am I thinking and what am I doing? Because we should really consider how Russia would view that if we support that. If we even just support it in word, not even in money, not even in action. Just supporting it in word is kind of, at some point you got to understand that there are, we're poking the bear, and for what reason? Does Ukraine need it? Does it need it to be secure? What's the end goal? And if the answer is no, it's just to tell Russia that now you can't mess with us, and look, we can have what you have. That's a race, and that's a race to the bottom, I think, and I'm afraid someone will win.
Okay, I think I completely agree with that. There are people who say that nuclear proliferation has generally been a force for world peace, of course, because it disincentivizes the attacks on other nuclear countries. And sometimes the way they talk about it, they act as though like England and France would still be fighting across the channel if it weren't for them both having nukes. No, I don't think that's the case, but I have to wonder, do you think they've contributed positively to world peace, or do you think most of the relative peace we've seen would have happened anyway, and they're just like an extra threat on top of that?
That's a good question. And I like putting out my opinions on things because I think that's something you should do on a show like this. And I caveat it with the fact that I have no business making such an opinion, but we still have them anyway. I don't think it's had the effect that we think it has. Maybe early on in the Cold War to have that superiority. I think that it has only lost its luster over time. And so I think it's trending in the wrong direction. Well, I'm sorry, it's trending in the direction of it's not what's keeping the peace. So we need to be a little bit more careful about reversing that effect. I think we're downtrending, and I think any kind of buildup is just going to, it's just going to rattle some sabers and really make some people mad.
I have to say that what's happened in Ukraine to me is like a very preferable model. The idea of if a country's invaded by a much larger, much more dangerous country unjustly, it would be the world uniting behind them with like traditional, conventional arms, rather than like this massive interlinking like nuclear deterrent system where one rocket fired across a border can lead to a chain reaction that sets off the end of the world or something. That to me, I guess the Ukraine situation's obviously horrible. I don't mean to make light of it, but in many ways, I guess it's given me a feeling of optimism about the potential future of political and military alliance, at least in Eastern Europe. I would hope we could carry that energy forward with time.
Yep, I share those sentiments with you.
I'm happy to hear that, especially from a person of your of your former rank and experience. I mean, like that. It's because so much of this is the first time that I've ever covered a war on my channel, and seeing this unfold live, it's been so, I guess, ridiculous, and so like comedically absurd and horrifying at the same time. It's really interesting to hear, I guess, some of my concerns and interests reflected in a person with like 1,000 times as much knowledge as me. I guess it makes me feel like there's more synchronicity between like the public and the brass than I thought there would be in terms of like approaching situations like this.
Good.
Just a feeling of optimism. I really appreciate you coming on. I really can't say it enough.
Thanks. I love this forum, and I hope that the listeners got something out of it. I'm sure I said things that they maybe agreed with, and I'm quite certain I said things that they didn't agree with. But know that it's just my opinion, and I want nothing more than peace. No one wishes for peace more than soldiers, and I really do believe that. And it's not an easy solution. And I applaud our leaders in the military and on the political realm of this. I think they're standing strong, and I know it's on their minds, and I really do. I think they are really putting in a lot of effort to try to figure out how to shape this the best way we can.
I hope for peace too. Oh, and a final one, asked from a person in my chat who introduced themselves as the person who introduced this budding bromance in their words. May I humbly suggest you ask him what the best book you've read this year is, and also to give you a hint that they're the person who's asking. It's just doing as they ask.
So this person, and I think it's a great example of how good tension leads to great discussion. She has a book, Your Right to Organic Tomatoes and Other Things Your Google search got wrong. And this is a great little manifesto that she put together, and it's worth reading. And yeah, she takes a very, very hard opinion on it. And I can say that that's, her beliefs, and that's good. But when I talk to her about it, we talk as just two individuals that have been friends, 20 years, more than 20 years, good Lord, 25 years, 26 years. So like, it's true that, you can be different of opinions, but you have something to learn. And I used to always say, I worked at West Point in charge of some of the cadets that were going to be later officers 10 years ago. And I said, hey, when you have a debate, your goal should be to lose. Because if you lose, you learn something. If every debate you enter, you keep winning, you need to find a new circle to debate in, man, because you're just not growing. And she's definitely stretched my my thought process on a lot of things in terms of how I get my values and how my beliefs are shaped. And so Your Right to Organic Tomatoes in this time and what's still going on in this country in these past few years will make you scratch your head on some things, whether you're on whatever side, but it will bring to light some discussions that can be had. You probably can do it with a little less F-bombs than she might use, but that's okay. If that's who you are, be who you are and be a good one.
I've been known to use a few of them myself. I'll add it to the list. Thank you so much for coming on, sir. It has been a tremendous pleasure, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks. Have a great weekend. And thank you so much again. This has been very enjoyable. And I hope your audience enjoyed it as well.
I know they did. Be well.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.
That was nice. I feel very professional in my anime t-shirt talking with a special operations officer for NATO, former special operator, right? Yeah. That was good. Yeah. I've said this before, but I feel like a lot of people don't understand that military and like vets are a totally different animal from like the people who support the military in like politics. You know what I mean? Like the super ultra pro military, like chest thumping patriot Republicans are just so on another. They don't care. It's just like them having like no bid contracts with like Raytheon or some shit. Like it's just a money thing for them, right? Like I'm pretty sure like Bernie Sanders had a ton of support in the military. Like every time I talk to like veterans or whatever, not every single time, but like I've talked to a good number of vets, they tend to be like pretty reasonable people, you know? Like he said, like nobody wants peace more than soldiers, you know? Like I feel like yeah, I don't know. I like legit. If you listen to like the US military brass talk, like the generals or whatever, like during testimonies or like depositions or whatever, in the congressional records, I feel like our top military officers are consistently more rational sounding than a lot of our politicians, because especially like Republicans, because Republicans get into office by screaming the loudest, stupidest shit they can, and military officers get to where they are not exclusively through competence. Obviously, it's not some perfect meritocracy, but I don't think it's subject to the same degree of like horse, like bullshitting that, you know, like you can get into power as a politician with. I'm not saying it's a meritocracy, just that it's more meritocratic, I think, than like getting to the like top of a political party or whatever. Like Mark Milley, yeah, Mark's yeah, seems like a pretty reasonable guy. Was it just me, or did he support Russia's argument about NATO being a threat for Russia if Ukraine joined? No, I think he was just saying that it would agitate Russia. His argument wasn't that like his argument was like Ukraine joining Russia, doing nuclear rearmament, whatever, or reconquering like the Crimea region or like the Donbass region. He wasn't saying they were bad or wrong or Russia would be threatened, just that like Russia needs to hold on to something after all this, you know? Unfortunately, that's probably true. I don't know if they need to maintain the Donbass region, but they have to maintain Crimea. I would actually, I think I would actually oppose Ukraine reconquering Crimea. Because the Crimean region was always like the most pro-Russian region of Ukraine. Not to say the annexation was correct, it wasn't. But like in terms of like the logistics of that, I feel like it would be an optics nightmare after the war is over as well. Because there, like, Crimea has a ton of pro-Russian people, and there would be like constant like protests and fighting and agitation, and I think it would make Ukraine come across as a lot more aggressive. It'd be like more of a mess than is needed, if that makes any sense. I feel like reclaiming the Donbass region could be defended, but I don't know about maybe Crimea. Maybe they could just open up like trade corridors with Crimea so they could get like water and stuff, and it wouldn't be as much of an issue. Yeah, I don't know. Ukraine just take the L? No. I'm not saying just take the L. I'm only saying that like for Ukraine, it could end up being like a miserable affair. Like not worth it for them. Morally, Ukraine has a right to Crimea. It's not reconquering, it's reclaiming their land. It's just like in the long term, I feel like that would just cause so many issues. The Donbass region, I think I support. The independent Luhansk and, you know, Donetsk territories, yeah. What are your thoughts on the future of the nuclear non-proliferation movement? Is it dead? No, I think right now, don't we have fewer nuclear warheads than we have like in a long time? Like we de-armed a lot after the Cold War, didn't we? Right now, I'm pretty sure that a fourth of America's nuclear stockpile is up for dismantling at the moment. Because, of course, dismantling a nuclear warhead is tricky business, 80% less. 80%? Wow. Yeah, and we're still decommissioning. And like let's be real, okay? I'm pretty sure that like most of Russia's nuclear capabilities are probably just on paper as well, right? Like they have those dollar store nuclear warheads, They have like radion they've gathered from a bunch of like fire alarms they've scraped together, and they have it inside of like a centrifuge with a grenade taped inside of it, and they have that on a bottle rocket, and that's just they call it a dirty bomb. Um it's, it's, sorry. Doubt they maintain them. Yeah, well, it's expensive to maintain those facilities. Also, I don't actually know what's more expensive. I'm pretty sure that ICBMs are more expensive than the warheads on them, right? Like, if you have the facilities to enrich uranium, I'm pretty sure that like once you have that infrastructure set up, the cost of an ICBM is far greater than the cost of a new nuclear warhead. So I think they have more warheads than they have ICBMs, so the total number of warheads it's not the same as the number that they could actually launch. It's like how North Korea is bragging right now because they have an ICBM, even though they've had warheads for a while. And again, this is probably a dollar store ICBM. I sincerely doubt it's real. I do not think it actually has the, what did it say, 8,000 kilometer range that it claimed to have. I do not believe that for a fucking moment. I do not think there is any chance that North Korea is capable of manufacturing any such thing. What if they strap a warhead to a Soyuz? Dude, what if they just go with a briefcase nuke, okay? Just have a person fly over, whatever. I attended a lecture about nuclear weapons. The actual warheads are theoretically designed to last 80 to 90 years. The mechanical components last about 20. Isn't there a part of modern nuclear warheads that degrades after like 5 to 10 years? It's some chemical that assists in the... Not chemical, it's the... What is it? Is it the... Tritium. That's it, tritium. It sounds like a Star Trek element, but yeah, apparently that degrades like really, really quickly. Oh wow, look at this. I didn't realize that it had been so that we decommissioned so much after the Cold War. Look at that. Blue is US, red is Russia, and all the rest of those slivers on top are China, France, the UK, Pakistan, India, Israel, South Africa, North Korea. I did not actually know that South Africa was a nuclear power. I probably should have known that. That's my bad, I guess. Okay, we can see what it's at today. A little less than 10K right now. China has 350. France has 290. Oh, South Africa has 0. Okay, they gave up their nukes. Okay, never mind. When did they have them? Oh, they had them up until... Oh, okay, the Cold War ended. All right. They're one of the few to denuclearize voluntarily. That is so cool. Why can't we all be like that? I feel like the countries that I'm most worried about right now are India and Pakistan, right? Because like Russia and the US have decommissioned their nuclear stockpiles. Russia and Pakistan are the ones, sorry, not Russia, India and Pakistan are the ones that have had their number going up. They didn't want a black nation having nukes. It was racism. Was it like explicitly that? Oh God, was that when apartheid ended? Wait, literally? Was it literally like we don't want black people having nukes? Oh my God. They didn't even know about Obama. Okay, never mind. Not based. Jesus Christ. Why are humans so fucking evil? Jesus Christ. Yeah, anyway, I guess I'm more worried about India and Pakistan. Because their numbers have gone up. Like, look, back in 2000, they both had like 15. And now, 20 years later, they both have 150. And it's only gone up since then, Like, they're making like 5 to 10 more every year. That's probably not good. China only has 300-ish. Yeah, well, I was being serious about what I was saying with that guy, though. I really, really feel like what we're seeing in Ukraine right now is evidence that nobody needs any nukes to meaningfully defend themselves against invasion, especially not if you're a large country like China or whatever else, right? Like, I'm telling you, even if you took all the nukes off the table and all military alliances. Like, we're not getting backed up by any of the rest of NATO or whatever. And it was like China, Russia, India, like all of them, whatever, just like every major non-NATO country united to attack the United States and to invade and conquer our territory. I'm pretty sure that with no nukes on the table, we would win, like, easily. Like I wonder if they would even make it past like 100 kilometers of the coast. Like, they would have some landings and just get annihilated. You know, like, this isn't some like ooh rah shit. It's like, keep in mind, Ukraine's military is way weaker than Russia's, even with Russia having all of its like logistical difficulties, right? And in spite of that, like, a lot of, just right now, so much of this is weighted towards the invaded person over the invader. Okay? Think about it, all right? A tank costs millions and millions of dollars, but it can be disabled with a $100,000 missile, or with an IED if you're good enough. Like, deploying soldiers around the world, do you know how much it would cost to arm a soldier from China and send them over to America? Like, that's a very expensive, like, to give them all the equipment they need for like a round the world occupation. Like, that's a really like, incredibly expensive. Do you know how much the bullet in their head would cost? Like, right now at current market rates, like 33 cents. Okay. Like, the issue is, like, right now it just seems like occupying, invading like a large, yeah, I don't know. No, I'm not saying that's the point of nukes. I'm only saying that, like, I feel like war has always been very expensive. This is nothing new. Do not mistake Russian debacle for state of affairs in all militaries. No. Trust me, okay? Russia's military is uniquely incompetent, but, like, look at America. Like, even America spent $1 bajillion occupying fucking Afghanistan. Afghanistan. We have the strongest military on Earth, and Afghanistan is, to put it lightly, not exactly a fortress of high-tech defensive fortifications, and we still spend a ton of money, like, just holding that territory. Like, it was like ridiculous amount. No other country could afford that, like just a ridiculous amount of money. The only point that I'm getting at here is just that I feel like ideally in a futuristic world that is better than this one, I feel like trade interdependence and existing conventional military equipment is sufficient to manage world defense, like to keep ourselves safe, to keep Europe safe, to ideally facilitate the safety of other countries around the world against unjust invasions. Not that America hasn't done its fair share of unjust invasions,